A confirmation about the audio, please, guys. If the audio is clear and available, kindly confirm. Thank you. We shall be starting in a couple of moments. Okay. So hello, a very warm good afternoon to all of you and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the session for environment. Now, prior to the break, we have had a discussion about what constitutes an ecosystem. What do we understand when we talk about an ecosystem for any organisms? And that includes a set of living conditions, living components, as well as the non-living components which end up influencing the environment. We took a look at what the living and non-living components constitute of and how is it that they would end up influencing the environment. If, let's say, you have the non-living conditions in any particular region undergoing a change and non-living conditions or abiotic factors including temperature, let's say availability of water, availability of light, if any of these undergo a change, then how is it that overall the interaction goes and how is it that the various different species respond to it? Now, that is something we have looked into. Now, here we carry out the discussion about the habitat and niche. Now, what do we understand when we talk about a habitat and what do we understand when we talk about a niche? Let us understand that. So, first of all, habitat. So, habitat is what? It is referred to as a kind of a living space, isn't it? Habitat, in simplest of the terms, is referred to as a unique living space of an organism. That is what is referred to as a habitat. Now, for every organism, the habitat requirement will be different. Not all the organisms will be able to survive or thrive in the same habitat. For example, if you compare, let's say, a species such as, let's assume, a cheetah. Now, a cheetah in general will end up requiring slightly open areas where it can actually run, outpace its various different prey that it consumes. So that is where it will never be found in very dense vegetation or very dense forest. Whereas, when you talk about the habitat requirement of, let's say, a monkey or a kind of an ape species, arboreal species, so to say, now they will primarily be found wherever the density of the trees are significantly higher, right? They won't be found in the grassland areas. So that is where the habitat requirement is different for each of the organisms. So the area where an animal lives or is called as its home, usually an ecosystem or an area within the ecosystem, that is what is referred to as a habitat. Okay, so habitat relates mostly to the non-living physical or chemical conditions required for that area to be decided or that area to be suitable as a living space. So always you will find a kind of a non-living factor and non-living components to be dominant there. Now, here, when we talk about niche, what is the meaning of niche? Right? It is, by the way, it is not Nikkei, it is not Nietzsche, it is niche. Now, what is referred to as a niche? So in any particular ecosystem, in any particular living space, an organism has got its own unique role to play when it comes to, let's say, performing a role as a consumer, as a producer, as a herbivore, carnivore, etc. Each organism have got their own role to play in the entirety of that ecosystem. For example, consider a herbivore like a deer. Now, a herbivore like a deer, in general, they will consume the producer community, they will consume the grasses or the leaves. But over a long run, their presence is also very important in the ecosystem because if the deer population declines, then the tiger population will also comparatively end up declining, isn't it? So that is the functional role played by an organism in a particular living system or an ecosystem. Okay, so that niche, when you talk about, it is the functional role. Functional role played by an organism. Right? Let us have that delineation. So a species niche, when you talk about, is composed of its habitat plus the biological or living things found in its habitat. And the living component within the habitat, that is what is generally referred to as the community system or the community setup. So here, when we talk about the biological factors, it would have the role to play, for example, in the food chain. What is the position that a particular individual organism occupies? That also determines its utility and usability in the long run. So interrelationships and interactions amongst the biological communities, that forms an important part of niche. So this is an important aspect of niche. So how, or the role played by organisms, okay, in the ecosystem setup, where how the various different species are dependent on the organisms and how that organism in turn is dependent on the other species, that determines the niche of the organism. Okay, so niche is one of those unique set of conditions where living, non-living components, all of them, they end up deciding the perfect setup in which the organism can actually survive, including the availability of food, including the perfect temperature conditions, perfect water conditions, etc. That is what is decided or referred to as a niche. So here, many of the organisms, they have a wider niche, in the sense many of the organisms that you come across, they basically can form multiple correlations and interrelations between various different species, and they can exist in different setup. For example, just take the case of deer in itself. Now, deers in general, as a group of species, they do not necessarily exist only in certain types of grasses. You will have various different varieties of deers who can adapt to different conditions. You will find certain species of herbivores even in high altitude region, even in low altitude areas, even in slightly colder conditions, even in warmer conditions. So they can exist in different conditions. Whereas you have certain species which require very, very specific conditions in order to survive. And that is referred to as a specialized niche. So specialized niche, that is applicable to species which have a very narrow window, a very well-defined physical, biological, or chemical requirements when it comes to survivability, a very narrow scope. Now, If an organism can be found within a very limited or specific condition, it is said to have a very specialized niche. Let us take the example. Let us take the example of the species which has been indicated here. So which is the species that you see on your screen? Let me see if you are aware of that. Which is the species that you see on your screen as of now? Any of us, if we are aware? So this is basically, no, this is basically what you refer to as a dugong. It is a marine herbivore mammal. Marine herbivore means it will consume what? It will consume the plants underwater. That is what it will consume, right? Now, in the region of seas and oceans, where is it that you find the presence of plants? You will always find the presence of plants in the region very close to the coastline. Okay, you'll always find them very close to coastline. Why? Because that is where sunlight is available. You will never find the plants to be present in the depth of water. Why? Because their photosynthesis cannot be carried out due to lack of sunlight. So that is why majority of the plants there, when we talk about the plants, majority of plants are found very close to the coastline. And why is that? For availability of sunlight. Okay, now here, let's suppose in the coastal area, you have some kind of construction going on, some amount of tourism activity going on, anything, encroachment is happening. Now, in any of these events, the coastal plants will be damaged significantly, always. So the dugongs, they will suffer significantly. So you will find that the species which have got very specialized niche, those are the species which are consistently on the threat for existence. For the survivability, they are consistently under threat, right? Whereas those species which have a more generalistic form of niche where they can exist in multiple different conditions and multiple different scenarios, those particular species you will find they are able to thrive in different conditions as well. So all the species having specialized niche, they are under threat of extinction. Why? As you have the very particular living conditions, living requirements. A kind of a very particular and very pinpointed condition of living requirements is where you will find the species to survive. So even if there's a slight disturbance, these species will feel the pain of it. That is why dugong, who belong to the larger group of species, what we refer to as manatees, right? Now they are under consistent threat because of hunting, because of the encroachments, coastal construction, unsustainable tourism, unsustainable fishing activities, etc. Now in India, where is it that you find dugong? In India, you find this particular species, particularly in the region of Gulf of Mannar and also in the region around the Great Nicobar Islands. So that is where you find them in India. Gulf of Mannar and Nicobar group of islands. Okay, we can say that Europhyte have a wide spectrum of niches. You can say that, generalized niche. Okay, so this is your difference between a habitat and a niche. When we talk about a habitat, a place or a part of an ecosystem occupied by a particular organism, and when we talk about niche, role of an organism within its environment or ecosystem. And here, this includes the function, biological function and biological role. Biological role played by the organism in any ecosystem. Okay, so that is what is the difference between a habitat and a niche. When we talk about a niche in general, previous slide. So this is the previous slide that you were requesting. Okay, now moving on. So it reflects the living place of an organism and reflects its biotic and abiotic association, including the diet, including the reproduction, terms of other role, functional role that you have. Now we come to the portion of population interaction. What is the meaning of this? And what are the types of population interactions? So basically, in any particular region, let's suppose you have two different species which are in existence, a deer and a tiger. Now, these species, when they are in existence in the same region, they will have a unique set of responses towards each other. Either one will consume the other, or both of them will help each other out, or both of them, let's say, will exist without impacting each other. So that is what is referred to as population interaction. So it is the behavior indicated by the various species when they share the living space with other organisms. So how do they interact with each other? It can only be carried out in certain set parameters. For example, you have what is referred to as predation. That is predator and prey. So where you have a predator who will consume the prey. So existence of prey is very important for the existence of the predator species as well. For example, if let's say in a grassland ecosystem, let's suppose you have grasses, right? Now, these grasses will be consumed by the deers first. It is not as if that tigers will start turning vegetarian. So here these will be consumed by the deer population. And those deers will be preyed upon by, let's say, the tiger or a lion. Now, the presence of deer population is very, very important in order to maintain the tiger population. Because let's say the tiger or the deer population due to some event or the other goes extinct, then what happens? The tiger will be left without food. Regardless of how much grasses are available, the tiger will be left without food. So in these conditions, that is why sometimes when the predator is very, very smart in the sense when they are very efficient killing machines, that is also dangerous for the predator sometimes. Because what they end up doing is they will consume all the prey that is present in a very quick time without giving them enough space, enough time to regenerate themselves. And that is where they will empty all the amount of food that they have, and eventually the predator will also go extinct. But at the same time, the predator also helps, the predator-prey relationship that you have, that also helps in balancing the ecosystem. How is it so? Let's assume, due to certain conditions, due to hunting, etc., let's suppose the tiger population has been eliminated. Now you have only deer population. Now, the deer population has got no threat now. It is under no threat whatsoever. So what will happen to its population? Its population will increase. Significantly, their numbers will increase. And when the deer population increases, they will all feed on the same grasses, isn't it? So in a way, the availability of grasses will be put into question. The availability will get lesser and lesser because the number of deer who will start consuming and chomping on these grasses, eventually they can end up making the entire region barren. So that will lead to a scenario where you have no food production at all. Now, in that condition, will the deers be able to survive? Absolutely not. The deers will perish, isn't it? Deers will perish. Why? Because they have finished their own food, and that is how they will perish. So that is why a healthy predator-prey relationship is a must. Okay. Very good. Yes, Kishan. Correct. So then you have competition, parasitism, commensalism, mutualism, and amensalism. Let us take a look at each one of them. Predation is where you have a predator-prey relationship in existence. That is where you have a predator-prey relationship. Now, predator here is example tiger, example here deer. Okay. Now, it keeps the prey population under control. So if, as I told you, if the tiger population is not there, there will be no check on the deer population. So that is why, in order to keep the deer population under control, you need certain amount of tigers, isn't it? Then it helps in maintaining species diversity in community by reducing the intensity of competition amongst the prey species. For example, let's suppose amongst the prey, if you consider the prey here, all those who consume grasses, all those species which consume grasses. Now, which are the species that you can think of which will consume grasses other than the deers? So here, let's assume one of those is deer. One of them, let's suppose, is a water buffalo or a wild buffalo. Another one, let's say, is a goat. Right? Let's assume wild boars, etc. Milch animals that you have, cows, etc. They will be consuming grasses. Now, the tigers, it is not as if they will only hunt the deer. They will be hunting some water buffaloes as well. They will be hunting some goats as well. They will be hunting some cows as well. So eventually, when the prey or when the predator is present in a region, that predator ensures that the species diversity is maintained and one of the species doesn't predominate. Okay, their population doesn't end up predominating. So that is where you do need this relationship to be efficient. You don't want the predator to be so very smart and so very efficient that the predator does not leave behind any trail of whatever is the prey population, or you don't want that condition to happen where the ecosystem balance in itself is disturbed. Okay, so if the predator is too efficient and overexploits its prey, then the prey might become extinct, and following it, the predator might also end up becoming extinct. And same is the case if the prey population or if predator goes extinct. Then what will happen? Prey population explodes, leads to what? High competition, leads to finishing of grasses, or let's say producers, and then prey population goes extinct. So in either cases, the organisms will be damaged and will be impacted, and the entirety of the ecosystem will be impacted quite sufficiently. Now, then you have competition. Competition is about the survival of the fittest. It is not about how good-natured or how good-hearted you are. It is, in simplest of the terms, the crudest of the terms, about the survivability of the fittest. The fittest will always be able to survive, whereas not so fit ones, they will find it very difficult to exist in that region. So competition is when you are all vying for the same resource or the same price. All of us right now are working for achieving a good rank in a competition. Civil services is a competition where what you are doing in itself is not sufficient. What the world is doing, and in comparison to that where you are, that becomes much more relevant, isn't it? So it is best defined as a process in which fitness of one species is significantly lower in the presence of another species, right? So here always you will have survival of fittest. Now here you will find, in the case of competition, species will share the same living space and compete for access to the same set of resources. For example, take the case of, let's suppose, cheetahs, and also let's take the case of lions. Both of them will consume the same herbivores, isn't it? Both of them will be vying for the same herbivores. Cheetahs, leopards, cheetahs, lions, tigers also. They all will be vying for the same set of herbivores. So if one of them consumes large number of herbivores, the other population comes to a danger. So a species whose distribution is restricted to a small area because of the presence of a competitively superior species is found to expand its range dramatically when the competing species is experimentally removed. In the sense, if we give an example, just as an example, let's suppose in a particular area, you have the coexistence of tigers and lions. Right. Now, ideally, tigers, they are, in a way, they have a good hunting scale. Lions also have a good hunting scale. But lions have a greater amount of stamina in comparison. Tigers have a burst of energy. Let's assume tigers are able to hunt more. So, if the tigers are able to hunt more, the lion population will automatically be in check. But due to some experiment and some experimental nature, let's suppose you are able to eliminate the tiger population, then you will observe suddenly the lion population starts going up. So, that is observed in the case of competition. Then you have parasitism, or the existence of parasites. What do we mean by parasitism? So whenever you have a condition where an organism lives off the other organism, where the organism will thrive on the body of the host organism, that is referred to as a parasite. So it is a relationship where one particular organism, that is a parasite, lives in the body or on the surface of another organism and benefits from the other organisms. So whenever you have parasites live in the body of other organisms. Okay, they live in the body of other organisms, and what it does, it basically, it can live on the surface as well, or it can live inside the body as well. It benefits from the body of the host. Example, take the case of virus. Virus, these are the organisms which will always be thriving in the host body, but they will never be able to reproduce or thrive or grow on their own individual level, isn't it? So here you can always take the case of, as an example, virus, COVID-19, for example. Okay, so when you put a virus out of the body of an organism, immediately you will find its survivability is at stake and it won't be able to survive for a long duration. But as soon as it enters into the body of any other organism, you will observe that it starts growing, it starts multiplying, and all these factors are observed. Then, after that, you have what is referred to as commensalism. Now, what is commensalism? Commensalism is that relationship where one organism or both of them, they are dependent on each other in such a way that one organism will benefit, but the other organism doesn't have any impact which is felt at all. So here, one species benefits and the other species is neither harmed nor benefited. In the case of parasites, generally the host organism is harmed ever so slightly. But in this case, the other species is neither harmed nor is benefited. So example of this. So you have multiple examples. So here, if we talk about example, consider the case of dung beetle. Right. Now these dung beetle, these are small insects which start growing in the region or which particularly thrive in the region where there is a cow or an animal dung. So generally you will find wherever the cow has emptied itself, wherever there is an excreta which is done, dung beetles, they start to thrive in that region. Now for the cow, it doesn't make any difference at all. For that particular cow, there is no difference to be played at all. But for that dung beetle, it is a matter of life and death. Similarly is the case with egrets, this kind of bird species. Now generally, and also various different types of storks, you'll find that whenever a heavy organism, such as a buffalo, such as a cow, when they walk through the grasses, you'll find few of the birds, they keep on tracing their footsteps. Right? Have you ever wondered why do they do so? Why is that they trace the, or if you have not observed it till now, notice it from now on. Whenever you will observe on the countryside that a cow or a buffalo takes a stroll, immediately you will observe few of the birds, they will start following the footsteps. Why is that? That is because when the cow or the buffalo, they move, they put in enough amount of pressure on the ground. And due to that pressure, many of the small insects, they start coming out. Now, while the cows are not interested in the insects, but the other birds which are following the cow, they will immediately snatch it up. So for the birds, this has benefited. The existence of a cow has benefited. But for that cow, it has made no difference at all. Okay. So here you have the example of dung beetle, you have the example of egrets. Then take another example of, let's say, barnacles and whales. Now, generally, in the case of marine species or marine organisms, larger ones, you will find that there's a kind of a small shell-like feature with a partial coloring, which is to be found in their bodies, which is attached to their bodies. And many of such smaller features, you'll find they attach themselves to the body of a marine species. These are what are your barnacles. Barnacles, they are also referred to as filter feeders. What is the meaning of filter feeder? They are also referred to as filter feeders. These basically are those species of organisms which live in the case of water, aquatic species in general, who will stay in their own place and they will trap any floating food object going around them and they will consume that. So these are the ones which trap any floating or moving food particle and then use it for consumption. So barnacles are your ideal example of filter feeders. Now what barnacles do is they attach themselves to the body of a large blue whale or large such animal. Now when they are moving underwater, the barnacles, because they are attached to their body, they are also moving along with them. So whatever food is there in the water, they have an access to them. So the barnacles, they benefit quite sufficiently, whereas for the large blue whales, it doesn't make much of a discernible difference at all. So that is the kind of commensalism. Barnacles will benefit and here no difference is observed. That is what is referred to as commensalism. Now after that, we have mutualism. Mutualism is also referred to as symbiotic relationship. This is also what is referred to as a symbiotic relationship. What is the meaning of that? That basically indicates both the species, a relation where both the species benefit from the interaction. Both of them. For example, here, take the case of the bees and the flowering plant. Here you have bees and flowering plant. Now, how is it that the flowering plants will reproduce? Or what is the methodology in which or following which generally the plants will reproduce? Let us see if we are aware. Pollination, very good. So, they rely upon pollination. Now, the flowers, they have various different hues of colors, various different types of smells, fragrances, and that is where you have all the pollen grains. This is where you have all the pollen grains which are present here. Now, let's suppose a particular bee comes over this area and a particular bee that starts to actually take in the nectar or drink that nectar, because that is why the flowers have all the different colors. The colors that the flowers have, that is not to attract you and me. That color is there to attract the insects, so that the insects get attracted by that. Now, when the insects sit on them in order to drink that nectar, in order to drink that sweet honey, so that is where these pollen, they attach themselves to the body of the bee. These pollens, they attach themselves. pollens attach themselves to the body of bee. Right? Now, this bee, after finishing up its work in this flower, it will fly away, it will go to the next flower, and that is where it will start sucking on the nectar. It is in that duration where the pollen that has been attached to its surface, that pollen will be dropped into another one, and that is how germination will happen. Right? So this bee, the bee drops these pollens upon interaction with the next flower, and that is what leads to pollination or germination of the young ones, isn't it? So this is a mutually beneficial relationship, or what is also referred to as a symbiotic relationship. Another example which can be taken for this is that of, when we talk about examples, you have corals and zooxanthellae. Now, this is a relationship that we study more about in the later portion, but when you talk about corals and their existence, so the corals, they are also generally stuck to the ground surface itself, and that is where they have various different tentacles attached. You'll find that the corals, they have various different tentacles attached to their body structure. Now, these corals, they do not, or they are not able to trap sufficient food to feed themselves. They are also filter feeders in a category. But then what they have is the presence of algae on their nodules. They have the presence of this symbiotic algae. Now, it is this algae which is attached to the body of the corals. That is the one which provides coloration to the various different corals that you encounter. Okay. So, this is what is referred to as these algae that you see. That is what is zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae. Now, overall, how is it that it is a symbiotic relationship? So basically, the zooxanthellae, they get a platform where they can grow. Along with that, because the corals are significantly able to synthesize calcium carbonate from the water around them, the zooxanthellae also get the availability of the nutrients, isn't it? So zooxanthellae, they get a platform to grow, plus nutrients like carbonate, calcium and carbonate. In return, what is it that the zooxanthellae does? In return of this, zooxanthellae carries out photosynthesis. And that manufactures food or provides food for corals. So hence, it is a mutually beneficial relationship for both of them. Okay, so that is what is referred to as a symbiotic relationship or a mutualistic relationship. Then after that, we have another kind of relationship which does exist, and that is what is referred to as amensalism. In the case of amensalism, one of the species is not even impacted. There is no impact on one species, whereas the other species significantly is inhibited or harmed by the process. So amensalism is that relationship where one species is inhibited or destroyed while the other one is not even impacted. For example, here take the case of these two trees. Now here, if let's suppose all the trees you have planted at the same time, let's suppose you have sown the seeds at the same time. Now this tree grows particularly quickly. It grows very quick. So here, this tree will not only grow quick, but at one point of time, it will also prevent the smaller ones for their access to resources such as sunlight. So it is a kind of a relationship shared between these trees A, B, etc., where one of them has got all the access to sunlight, etc., and it is not at all impacted. The major one, it is not even impacted. Where the small ones, their height will be stunted. They will be significantly impacted in terms of their growth. So example of this, you have majority of invasive alien species. Invasive alien species means those kinds of species which are not primarily or originally not found in that area but have been introduced in that area. For example, in India, you can take the case of Senna spectabilis. Now, Senna spectabilis is kind of a tree which appears very similar to the image that you see in the screen. It has got a very distinct yellowish flowers, right, which is attractive for ornamental purposes, and that is why it was introduced. Now, Senna spectabilis is typically a tree of South American region. Now, it was introduced in India for ornamentally decorative purposes. But once this tree found its place in the wild, it started impacting the local flora and fauna quite sufficiently. How? Because this Senna spectabilis would grow at a very quick pace, whereby it would grow sufficiently, and the surrounding trees, they would be devoid of sunlight, they would be devoid of water requirement and other minerals as well. So, rate of growth is very high. Okay, and when the rate of growth is very high, impacts the growth of other tree species. Right? Similarly, you have another example. Now, in order to get rid of this problem of Senna spectabilis, and this is a portion of current affairs, Kerala government had initiated a program along with the local population and the local communities. And that was a program which was referred to as Project Vanikaran. Okay, you had Project Vanikaran. So this was program launched by the forest department to solve the problem. Where is Project Vanikaran associated with? Kerala. Okay. Another example that you can derive from here. Take the case of Lantana camara. Now, Lantana camara is a kind of a tree. It is an invasive alien species. If possible, I'll try to show you the image of that plant in the next weekend as well. But you can Google search it because I'm sure all of you would have encountered this or would have seen this in your own locality. That is how prominent it is. It is a kind of a small tree that you will find basically a kind of a small bush kind of a growth where it has got multiple small flowers of various coloration, from white to red to yellow to various different colorations. You will have these many small flowers. Generally, they were also brought in for ornamental purposes. And why ornamental purposes? Because they would be grown in the home gardens, in the kitchen gardens that people would have. So rather than developing a bush, people would plant Lantana camara. So it has got a kind of a bushy appearance in general, right? And in various different parts of the country, it is referred to by the term lantana. If you ask the biologists or the ecologists of any particular region, they will refer to them as lantana itself. That is how common it is. So what this does is that in a particular area, because it has got a kind of a bushy appearance, it entangles itself. Bush means it doesn't have a great height. It will not have a very distinct foliage, but a lot of bush, right? Entanglement of the stems of the branches in such a way that you won't be able to crisscross through that region, right? So that kind of a feature is observed. Now, because of that bushy feature, it deprives the other indigenous plant growing in that region of the very important sunlight. Okay, sunlight, which is very, very much important for them, that is deprived. And that is why the local breeds, the local communities of plants or species which take their own particular time to mature, they are impacted. But Lantana camara, because it has a very quick growing time, it is not at all impacted. So because of its bushy nature, it is also an invasive alien species. Bushy nature blocks sunlight for other plants. Okay, now this is also an invasive alien species. Another example we can take of eucalyptus. Now, yes, Prosopis juliflora is also something you can take as an example. Eucalyptus, one of the very tall trees. I'm sure most of you would have observed the presence of eucalyptus, but I hope you are also aware eucalyptus is not originally to be found in India. It is not a tree which originally grew in India. It was introduced in the early 1800s, and significant portion in the southern part of the country, as well as the Himalayan foothills. That is where the eucalyptus was actually introduced. Now, why was it introduced? For example, recently you had the entire celebration which was carried out as Ooty, as a hill station, celebrated 200 years of its formation. Right now, Ooty was one of those regions in India where eucalyptus was introduced for the first time. I hope you are aware where Ooty is. Okay, so Ooty was one of those first places in India to get the introduction of eucalyptus. Eucalyptus originally is from Australia, is a native species of Australia. Now, why was it introduced in Ooty? Because in the region of the Nilgiris, it was observed that the amount of rainfall would be so heavy through the year that many of these regions were consistently under the influence of marshy conditions, muddy conditions, and that would make it unsuitable for cultivation. And also because of the fact that there was so much amount of standing water, muddy water, you had a lot of mosquitoes which would breed in that area, and malaria was very common, very prominent in the region of the Nilgiris. That is where not many people or not many settlements were found to be present in that region. That is when the Britishers, what they did, they brought in eucalyptus into India and introduced it into that region. Why? So that eucalyptus will absorb that excess moisture. Eucalyptus has got the ability to extract all that excess moisture because it absorbs a lot of moisture from the surrounding areas and continue to grow taller. You would have observed, whenever you would have observed in any place the presence of eucalyptus trees, you would have observed that that particular region is not at all muddy or marshy, right? But the trees are very tall because they absorb all of that water. So once this eucalyptus started coming into prominence, their growing time was also very quick. They could grow very quickly. Secondly, they would ensure that the local breed of the plants, they did not have enough access to water. So that is where many of the local species of the plants, they were put out of circulation. And also, you would come across a situation where, because the land created would be so very dry, immediate incidents of forest fires, etc., are something which is very prominent. That is why in the portion of western part of Tamil Nadu and some parts of central Tamil Nadu, whenever you come across the event of forest fire, it is invariably linked to increased eucalyptus proliferation in that particular area. So that is where it absorbs all the moisture and grows very quickly. So that means the local communities of the plants suffer. Then another example, what is also referred to as the terror of Bengal. That is also an invasive alien species, which is the plant species referred to as the terror of Bengal. Are we aware of that? Okay, it is basically water hyacinth. No, Sundari tree is significantly beneficial. Water hyacinth, also referred to as terror of Bengal, because at the rate with which it would spread over. So water hyacinth, I'm sure you would have looked at its images. These are the succulents which end up floating on the water, right? They don't require soil to grow. They can float on water and they will multiply very quickly. So if, let's suppose, you have a region of a lake or a larger pond, let's suppose you have a lake or a pond, suppose, right, in an area. Now this water hyacinth, it will start growing in all of these. Now what will it lead to? When its density increases, many of the times you would have come across many of such ponds or water bodies where there is only vegetation to be found. Water is completely covered under the garb of that vegetation. I'm sure in whichever part of the country that you are in, you would have observed this phenomenon. So when they suddenly start multiplying in numbers, what they do is they are able to block the availability of sunlight. So the availability of sunlight at the bottom, which earlier would have been made possible, that availability of sunlight is blocked. So that means the natural aquatic plants, which would carry out photosynthesis and would produce oxygen in the process, enriching the water of oxygen, those plants are not to be found anymore, isn't it? Why? Because the water hyacinth is blocking the sunlight. So they are not allowing the local aquatic plants to breed. That means the amount of dissolved oxygen that starts to go down. When the amount of dissolved oxygen begins to go down, the fishes, their ability to survive, etc., that will be damaged. So that is how multiple species, they start dying. So that is the role played by water hyacinth. Block the availability of sunshine, sunlight at the, or rather for other aquatic plants. Okay, so these are the various examples that you can take. One example, second example, third, fourth. Can we consider water weed as an example of amensalism? Not always, unless and until they are damaging the local community, not so. If they are damaging the local community of plants, yes, you can take that as an example. Okay, I hope, Abhishek, that is understood. Right? Now, after this, we come to the flow of energy. How is it that energy flows in the ecosystem? So that can be expressed in the form of a food chain, or can also be expressed in the form of what is referred to as a food web. Food chain ends up exhibiting a kind of a linear relationship. That is what is explained or exhibited by the food chain, a kind of a linear relationship in between the various different organisms and how the energy is actually transferred within the ecosystem. That is indicated by food chain. So a linear relationship or linear depiction of the various organisms in an ecosystem and how they help in the transfer of energy. That is what we regard as a food chain. For example, as simple a mechanism as, let's suppose, a grass. Now, if you have a grass here, now then this is consumed by the deer, that is consumed by a tiger. This is a linear relationship, right? So this exhibits a food chain. But when we talk about a food web, what is a food web? So the name in itself is self-explanatory. It is a kind of a combination of various different food chains existing in an ecosystem, which tells you the multifarious relationships that various organisms have amongst each other, where a particular organism is not only dependent on one source for the availability of food, but is able to diversify that, right? So interconnected food chains within an ecosystem, where organisms consume multiple sources for food and are in turn consumed by multiple predators. Now, the place that an organism occupies in that chain or in that network of energy flow through the food chain or food web, that is what is referred to as the trophic level for any organism. So trophic level ends up indicating the place that an organism occupies within the food chain. So when you hear about the term trophic level indicates the position that an organism occupies in the food chain. Okay, let us take a look at that. Food chain is single energy transfer chain, whereas food web is a combination of different food chains. Yes, that is correct. So here, if we take a look at that, food chain shows how the energy is transferred from one living organism to another via food. And it describes the movement of energy as well as nutrients into the ecosystem. Now, in general, if you take a look at it, you have two different classifications and two types of food chain. One is what is referred to as a grazing food chain. Another one is detrital food chain. What is the difference between them? Whenever you talk about the grazing food chain, here the photoautotrophs or the plants, they are the prime source of energy. In this, the plants serve as the prime source of energy. Serve as the prime source of energy for the ecosystem or for the entire food chain. Whereas when we talk about detrital food chain, now detrital is derived from the term detritus. So here, dead organisms, dead organic matter, dead and decomposing organic matter, that serves as the main source of energy for all the rest of the food chain. So here, dead and decaying organic matter serve as the source of energy for the rest of the food chain. Okay, so that is what we have as the detrital food chain. So you have various different types of food chain anywhere, be it an aquatic ecosystem, be it the terrestrial ecosystem. You will have the grazing food chain as well as the presence of detrital food chain. Detrital here refers to the dead and decaying organic matter in general. So this is your depiction of an ideal or a simple food chain where you would observe here trophic levels are indicated. What do we mean by trophic levels? The position in the food chain is indicated by the trophic level. So the energy is received by the sun First of all, by the producers. So the producers, they form the first trophic level. That is where they produce food. And then they are consumed by the herbivores. That constitutes the second trophic level. Then they are consumed by the carnivores. That is the third trophic level or the secondary consumer. Then fourth trophic level or tertiary consumer. So this portion that you see, this is a part of grazing food chain. This is a part of grazing food chain. Whereas, in the case when, let's say, a plant grows, there will also be a possibility when, let's suppose, a leaf drops, like a leaf falls or a stem falls. Now, that will be a dead organic matter, isn't it? So, that dead organic matter will serve the detrital food chain. At any point of time, any of the organisms which die, they will eventually cater to the detrital food chain. Okay. So, here, overall, when we talk about food web is nothing but an interconnect of all these different food chains that you encounter in any particular ecosystem. Each of the species, it can be consumed, and in turn, it consumes a variety of different organisms. So, here, for example, take the case of a desert food web, right? The food web which you observe in deserts. So, where you will observe that the grasses, they can be consumed either here by the rabbits, right? Rabbits can be consumed by cheetahs also. Now, rabbits, but cheetahs are not to be found in the desert. That is a different matter altogether. But in the grassland ecosystem, that will work. But these grasses are to be consumed by the grasshoppers as well. They can be consumed by the locusts as well, isn't it? Now, once they are consumed by, let's say, the grasshopper will be consumed by a lizard. A lizard will be consumed by a hawk or an eagle, isn't it? At each point of time, any of these, they can serve the detrital food chain by being consumed by the bacterium. Or in other words, you can have certain plants which are consumed and certain portions of those plants consumed by certain species of rodents. They can be very small ones. You have larger spiders which operate, larger snakes which operate, frogs which operate. So you have an interconnectivity. And that interconnectivity ensures that a particular species is not reliant only on one source of food. When you have that interconnectivity which exists, for example, take your example. Let's suppose you as an individual, you have a norm in your life that I will consume only potatoes. I will not consume anything else. No other vegetable. I will not consume any other meat products or animal products. I will not consume any of the greens. I will only consume potatoes. One of the major problems that you find in majority of the kids growing up, that they will consume only one type. Now, in case there is unavailability of that food item, in your case, you have the option to create so much of chaos that your parents or your support system eventually will have to bring that potato, even if it is to be imported directly from White House. You will create a chaos that they will bring it in front of you. But in the entirety of the ecosystem or in the outside world, such is not the case. So let's suppose an organism like you has got that stringent mechanism that I will consume either only potato or nothing else. Now, if potato is unavailable, what will the organism consume? They will start getting starved, isn't it? So that is why when you have a resilient food web, that resilient food web ensures that there is a diversified source of intake of nutrition so that a species is not damaged, right? A species is not threatened, and there are multiple options, right? I'm sure many of you would be able to associate with that. So that is basically about food web. Now, in the manner in which we talk about the food chain and food web, that how they help in transfer of energy, here, food chain and food web, they also end up transferring contaminants as one moves from one particular trophic level to the other. So the contaminants also are transferred by the food chain and the food web. And that transfer of contaminant happens either by bioaccumulation or biomagnification. These are basically methodologies by which the contaminant level or rather the contaminants travel and enter the food chain. Let us understand that. When we talk about accumulation, bioaccumulation, first of all, let us talk about bioaccumulation. What is this? So let us understand this first of all. So accumulation means storing, perfect. So when we talk about, let's suppose, an organism, let's take our own example. Let's say we consume wheat or rice from a particular farmland on a daily basis. Now that farmland uses a lot of artificial fertilizers, a lot of various artificial chemicals. Now, upon the first day, there will be buildup of some amount of those chemicals in our body, isn't it? But it might not be to the harmful extent. On the second day, the level of buildup will further increase. On the third day, it will further increase. So as we keep on consuming the same contaminated food item, the amount of contaminant level in our body keeps on accumulating, keeps on increasing. That is bioaccumulation. So in the initial days itself, it might not have any kind of detrimental impact, in the sense it might not have an impact whereby our body gets damaged immediately, but as it starts getting accumulated, we have a long-term damage that we experience. So here, bioaccumulation refers to that particular event where, with the passage of time, the level of contamination in the body keeps on increasing. Why? As the same contaminated food is continuously consumed. So if I give you a statement here, that species who are older, right, in any particular kind of a species, the older ones, the older members of those species, the contaminant level in them will be greater than the younger member of the same species. Will that be true or wrong? What do you think? Will that be true or false? If I tell you that in the same species, the older members will have a greater level of contamination. Correct? True? Perfect. So that is where UPSC had asked another previous year question based upon this particular sentence. And again, the candidates, they did panic that how is it that we are supposed to know what is the characteristic of the older species or the younger species? That is based upon the very simple aspect of bioaccumulation. So the older members of a species will have greater level of contamination Then comes biomagnification. Magnification. Something is increasing in quantity. That is why magnification. So here what happens is, as and when we move up through the food chain, the level of contamination goes higher up. So let me write the definition first of all, and then I'll elaborate with the help of example. So biomagnification. So that means as one moves up the food chain, the amount or the level of contamination goes up. How? Let's take the examples. So suppose we talk about a nearby sea. Let's suppose we talk about a region of a nearby sea. Now, in the coastal landscape, if agriculture is to be carried out, in that sea, will you not have the presence of various different nutrients, fertilizers, chemicals, all of them will enter that? Now, let's suppose in that sea, you have the planktons, the phytoplanktons. Let's suppose, first of all, the phytoplanktons. These phytoplanktons, the microscopic ones, they will get influenced by this pollutant or contaminant which has been introduced into the water body or in a lake or anywhere that you consider. Now, these phytoplanktons, let us assume that each of them, they have the presence of these contaminants at a level of 5 microgram, right? I hope you are aware, microgram refers to 10 to the power minus 6 grams, okay? Now, these phytoplanktons initially will be consumed by zooplanktons. The smaller zooplanktons which are there, they are consumed in the food chain by zooplanktons. Now, it is not going to be the case that one zooplankton will consume one phytoplankton. Nobody follows that kind of a dietary discipline out there in the world. In the real world scenario, everybody is expected to follow some dietary discipline, but out there in the nature, there is nothing as such. So, these zooplanktons, they will consume these phytoplanktons. Let's say each one of them, they consume 1,000 phytoplanktons, let's assume. Or let's have a lesser number as well if you can. Let's assume that each one of them, they eat only 10 phytoplanktons. Each one of them, only 10 phytoplanktons. So, what will be the level of contamination in each of the zooplanktons? If one of them consumes 10 phytoplanktons, what is the level of the contamination which will be found here? It will be, each of them will have 50 micrograms. Isn't it? Now, let's suppose we go to smaller fishes such as krills. Now, these krills, they are dependent upon these phytoplanktons or these zooplanktons. So these krills, the smaller ones, let's assume they start consuming each one of them 1,000 of these zooplanktons. So eventually, what do you have? You will have 50 milligrams, right? You will have 50 milligrams in each of the krill. Then let us assume you go to a smaller fish, a kind of a fish like, let's say, a dolphin. Now, a dolphin consumes 1,000 of these krills, let's suppose. So in each of the dolphin, the amount of contamination is how much? Each of the krills have around 50 milligrams. So in each of the dolphin, that will be, if they consume 1,000 krills each, that will be 50 grams. Now let's suppose these dolphins are eventually hunted by the greatest hunters of the planet, that is the killer whales or orcas. Now they start hunting these dolphins. Each of the orcas, they will consume only 2 of the dolphins, let's assume, right? So here, by the time we talk about an orca, or what are referred to as a killer whale, what is the amount of contamination there? It is 100 gram. So what do you observe? Here, each of the phytoplankton was contaminated only by 5 micrograms. But as you traveled up the food chain, each of the killer whale is actually contaminated by 100 grams, right? So the contamination level increases as you move up the food chain. And that is the process of biomagnification. Okay? Any doubts that we have till now? Let me know. No? Perfect? Good. So after this, we move ahead with the portion of ecological pyramids. We will start covering the portion of ecological pyramids. How can we differentiate between bioaccumulation and biomagnification based upon the source that we consume? And for example, when we talk about, let's say, mercury poisoning that happens in us humans, that is generally as a result of biomagnification, because that mercury initially will impact the local lake or pond in trace quantities. It will be the smaller species which will get impacted by that, and that will reach to the fishes, and that will reach to us. So that is one of the ways. Other ways is, let's suppose we consume corn, or let's suppose we consume wheat or rice. Now there is chemical contamination due to the application of chemical fertilizers. That will be your bioaccumulation. Okay? Abhishek, that is the case as it is. You will find that, especially in the case of when we talk about the dietary practices in the wild, and that is where the example of orcas and killer whales, they are the prime ones, because you will find that just for the urge of hunting, they will hunt down even a blue whale, which is almost 2 to 3 times or 5 times their size. They will hunt down a blue whale, and then they are not hungry anymore, so they will leave it out in the open for rest of the fishes to consume. So that is where you have that kind of where nature runs the roost, where wild is the chief, as it is said. So Kishan, can we say that increasing trophical level? Are you referring to trophic level, my dear friend? Trophic level is different as compared to tropical level. So increasing trophic level, contamination is increased, called biomagnification. And no, not vice versa. But your biomagnification concept is perfect. But bioaccumulation can happen in any trophic level. Okay. So Benita, so bioaccumulation happens in individual species, but biomagnification happens across the species. That is correct. That is correct. Okay. So now here we come across to the trophic levels and beyond. Before that, we take a break, and then we will be back as we continue with that. So this is, I will leave you on this particular slide so that you get an idea about the trophic levels. But let's take a break first, and we'll be back. So we take a break for 15 minutes, and then we are back. Okay. of trophic levels. Now, what do we understand by trophic available? A confirmation about the audio, please, if the audio is clear and available. Thank you, Abhishek. I just hope that the sessions are meaningful. So here, now we come to the portion of trophic levels. Now, what do we understand by trophic levels? Trophic levels in any particular food chain, in any particular chain of transfer of energy, they end up representing the position that any organism holds, the position that any organism is going to occupy. That is indicated by what we refer to as a trophic level. So here, this represents the definition of it if you want it. So the levels of a food chain is called a trophic level. Okay, that is the level in general. Now, for all of you who had basically been seeking the availability of PPT, so the PPT is available for you, right? So this is the PPT which is available to you in the chat section. It has been made available. So all of you who were requesting for the availability of PPT, there you go. So here it refers to the level that any organism occupies in the food chain. Okay, that is what is indicated here. For example, take the case of the producer community. Now, producer community, their source of energy is what? Their source of energy is, let's suppose the sun. We are talking about the photoautotrophs, for example. Let's assume sun is the source of energy. So that is where now it will get its own energy. Now, herbivores, which will represent the second trophic level. This will be the first trophic level. This will be the second trophic level. This will be the third trophic level. So the herbivores, they gain their energy from whom? The producers. Right? For example, grasshoppers, antelopes, termites, water fleas, etc. Then those herbivores will serve as a source of energy for the primary carnivores, who will serve as a source of energy for the secondary carnivores, who will serve as a source of energy for other trophic levels. So that is how trophic levels basically are designated or delineated. So that is the aspect of trophic level in a particular food chain. Now then we come to the portion of ecological pyramids. Now, ecological pyramids, they give us an idea about how sustainable a particular ecosystem is by explaining to us the quantitative matters in an ecosystem. The quantitative details of an ecosystem, they are indicated by a relationship that we refer to as ecological pyramid. For example, it is in simplest of the terms, it is nothing but the relationship that you have between the various different trophic levels, and that is indicated in the form of, let's say, the numbers, pure numbers, or the weight that they carry, that is the biomass, or the amount of energy that is transferred from one trophic level to the other one. So that gives us an idea about whether a particular ecosystem is sustainable or not. So it is of three different types. Ecological pyramids, it is of three different types. You have pyramid of numbers, you do have the pyramid of biomass, and you also have pyramid of energy. Okay, these are the three different ecological pyramids that you have. So here, let us take a look at all of these different types of ecological pyramids, and let us try to understand that how do they function overall. So we will be starting first of all by the basics of the types of ecological pyramids. So you have pyramids of numbers, for example. Now what they indicate is the absolute number of individuals present at each of the trophic level, be it at the producer level, be it at the consumer level, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, quaternary consumer, and so on. So here the absolute number of individuals is represented. The number of grasses, the number of herbivores, the number of primary consumers, all of that. Then you have pyramid of biomass. In the case of the pyramid of biomass, here the total dry weight of an organic matter is calculated at each of the trophic levels. What is the total dry weight? Okay, now dry weight here represents the total mass that an organism has. It does not include the fluidic contents which are generally built up within an organism. The total mass of that organism, other than the excessive matter that you have, the various different fluidic buildups, etc. Only the organic component. And then pyramid of energy, it indicates how energy is transferred from one trophic level to another, whether sustainable amount of energy is transferred from one level to another or not. So here number is highlighted, here weight is highlighted, and here you have the rate of energy flow that is highlighted. Each of them represents different trophic levels. Different trophic levels. Okay, now let us take a look at each one of them, starting with the pyramid of numbers. Now here the absolute number is actually something which is looked at. So when we talk about the absolute number, let us take the case of the grassland ecosystem. Now in a simple relationship, not in a kind of a convoluted food web relationship, we are not going to talk into that. We are just going to clarify our concept based upon the very simple relationship of, let's say, a grass, the presence of grasses. Let's suppose they are consumed by the deer population or the antelope. They are consumed by the larger predators, let's say tigers. Now here, in this situation, apply your general logic. Where is it that the number will be more? Will the numbers of tigers be maximum? Will the numbers of antelopes be more? Or will there be a greater number of grasses which will be available? Beautiful. Grasses, always. Because if the grasses are not present in sufficient quantity, how is it that the energy will be transferred? So here the number of grasses will be maximum. So then comes the number of antelopes, which will be lesser as compared to the number of grasses. And the number of tigers will be the least in that ecosystem. So that will be represented in the form of a kind of an ecological pyramid. So that is here where you have the presence of grasses, then you have the second antelopes, and then you have the tigers. Okay, so then when we talk about the pond ecosystem, now in the case of the pond ecosystem, the number of phytoplanktons or any aquatic ecosystem, the number of phytoplanktons will be very high. That will be followed by the small fishes. They will be lesser in number as compared to phytoplanktons, because the phytoplanktons, they are microscopic in size. So they will be present in millions. Then comes the species of small fishes. Then comes the species of larger fishes. Eventually, the apex predators. So here also, just like in the case of the grasses, the pyramid will be upright. Pyramid will be upright means the pyramid is actually straight with a broader base and a tapered top. That is the upright pyramid. But in the case of pyramid of numbers, you will not always come across conditions where it is upright. you will come across certain exceptions as well. This is an example of pyramid of numbers, where when we talk about the primary producer, let's suppose the grasses, they are present in terms of, let's say, 58 millions. This is just a representation of a grassland ecosystem. Then you have, let's say, 700,000 of the primary herbivores or the primary consumers, secondary consumers, and you have tertiary consumers. So that is the balance. Now, let us take a look into the pyramid of numbers when we talk about the forest ecosystem. Now, in the case of a forest ecosystem, the pyramid of number is actually a bit skewed. It is neither completely upright nor is it completely inverted. So here, neither completely upright nor completely inverted. Okay, so that is the case of the forest. How? So basically, if you take a look at the forest, you will have the trees. Trees are the main source of production of energy. So that tree, generally one in number. Now that tree will be able to support many different insects. Now those insects will be feeding upon, let's say, those insects will be fed upon by few of the birds. Now those few birds will eventually be fed upon by one large apex predator. So here, the ecosystem pyramid that you will generate, that will be significantly skewed. In the sense, it will indicate a feature somewhat like this. So here, you have one tree that feeds upon, or that is something which basically houses multiple insects. Then few smaller birds, and then eventually one apex predator. Okay, so that will be the characteristic that you will encounter, where you will observe one tree eventually providing habitation or a habitat to 2,000 various insects. That basically is those insects form the base upon which 90 sparrows they feed upon, and eventually all of them they feed upon, or they are one which is fed upon by the hawks, which turn out to be the apex predator. Now, in certain scenarios, this pyramid of number can also end up getting inverted. How is it so, or in what scenario? So when we talk about an ecosystem where we talk about, let's say, parasites, that is where you will observe that this is one of those ecosystems where it is the pyramid of number is inverted. Previous slide. Okay, this is the previous slide. Okay. Now, coming to the pyramid of numbers in the case of parasitic community. So when you talk about the parasites, in those cases, you will have the pyramid of numbers to be inverted. How? So one tree will have few fruit-eating birds. Now, based upon those activities of birds, you will have multiple small lice, bugs, and other parasites and insects which will be living upon them. And you will have endless number of microbes who will rather be devouring and dependent upon these insects for their survivability. So what is the pyramid shape that you derive from here? The shape of the pyramid that you will be able to derive is going to be inverted. The shape is going to be inverted. So that is where, in the case of the pyramid of numbers, this is going to be inverted in case of parasites. This trivia will be relevant for your prelims. Important for prelims. Because such kind of exceptions, whenever they are present, UPSC exploits those exceptions, and UPSC does test whether you as a candidate you are aware of those exceptions or not. Previous pyramid was both inverted and upright. Yes, in the Abhishek, in the case of the forest, it was both of them. But a complete inverted will be the one which you will observe in the case of the pyramid of parasites. Now, then coming over to the pyramid of biomass. Now, pyramid of biomass is where you have a kind of dry weight, the total weight, which is calculated. Generally, the weight of the producers, they are significantly higher as long as the producer community is substantial. In the sense, when you talk about the plants, when you talk about the trees, their weight is going to be substantial. So in the terrestrial ecosystem, the pyramid of biomass is always going to be upright. Why? Because if you calculate the total weight of all those grasses, the total weight of all the trees which are consumed by the herbivores, they will be significantly huge. Then if you calculate the total weight of fewer numbers of deer population or antelope population, that will be slightly lesser. And eventually there will be 2 or 3 tigers or 2 or 3 lions present in that system, so their weight will be comparatively lesser. So here, when we talk about, let's say, a grassland. Now, in the case of a grassland, pyramid will be upright. Upright pyramid. Why? Weight of the grasses or the producer will be maximum. Producer is maximum. Now, what about the aquatic ecosystem? When we talk about an aquatic ecosystem, here the producers are what? Here the producers are largely the microscopic phytoplanktons. And the apex consumer is what? A large blue whale or a killer whale, which is one of the heaviest organisms that you will find. The blue whale is the heaviest organism that you will find across the planet, isn't it? So that is where, in the case of an aquatic ecosystem, you will find that because the phytoplanktons, they themselves being microscopic, first of all, even though their numbers are huge, their overall weight will be less, because in their weight also you will have a lot of fluidic content, etc. And eventually the apex predators being one of the heaviest across the entirety of the globe, that is where the pyramid of biomass will be inverted. So here in the pond or in the aquatic ecosystem, the producers are small organisms. That is why their biomass will be the least, and this shows an increase as you move up. So here in this case, it will be inverted. Aquatic, it will be inverted pyramid structure. Okay, so this is again a trivia. Wherever you have an inverted structure, that is something you have to extract for your examination. So this again is a trivia relevant for your prelims. Relevant for prelims. Now after this, we come across the pyramid of energy. This is not the pyramid of biomass. Now we come across the pyramid of energy. Now, in the case of pyramid of energy, it ends up signifying the transfer of energy from one particular trophic level to the other trophic level. How much energy is transferred as you move from the producer to the primary consumer to the secondary consumer to the tertiary consumer? How much energy is transferred at each level? Because understand, even that energy transfer has to be sustainable. In any area, if the energy or in any kind of ecosystem, if not enough energy is transferred to the next level, what is the outcome of that? What is the outcome that you gain from that? Basically means that species will not get enough energy regardless of how much food that it consumes. That means the species won't be able to survive. And at any trophic level, if there is a species which is finding it difficult to survive, on all the trophic levels higher up, all the other species will end up facing a lot of such issues as well. So that is why, in the case of pyramid of energy, you have a 10% energy law, which is observed. 10% energy rule. And what does that energy rule tell you? That from one trophic level to the next trophic level, only 10% of the energy is transferred. Remaining 90% of the energy is consumed for respiration and for other body's metabolic activities. So here, at each trophic level, only 10% of energy is transferred above. Remaining 90% is consumed by the organism for respiration, metabolism, etc. Okay, so that is what is the 10% energy rule or the 10% transfer rule. Now think about it for a brief moment. At any level, whatever is the amount of energy gain, only 10% is transferred up. Then furthermore, only 10%. So under any circumstance, do we come across a scenario where this pyramid can be inverted? What do you think? Under any circumstance or in any ecosystem, do we come across a certain situation where this pyramid will be inverted? Perfect. In aquatic system, how will it be inverted? Apply your logic there. So we have not talked about which ecosystem we are talking about. We are just talking about the transfer of energy. So in any ecosystem that you consider, the base or the first trophic level will have the maximum energy. 10% of it will be transferred up, 10% of it will be transferred up, 10% will be transferred up. So it will always end up indicating an upright condition. Under no circumstance will you come across a pyramid of energy which is inverted. Inverted means what? An inverted pyramid of energy means that a lower level is giving more energy to the higher level than what it has. How is it possible? Let's assume you consume some, or a herbivore consumes certain grasses. Whatever amount of energy the grasses will have, at max it will be able to deliver that much. How will it be able to deliver more energy than that? So under no circumstances will the pyramid of energy be inverted. So it will always be upright. It means herbivores will get more energy as compared to the carnivores. Yes, depending upon where your position is in the food chain, you will get that access to energy. So this is the pyramid of energy. This is regardless of the ecosystem that we are talking about. And this is your 10% rule, where the producers, where let's suppose this is the amount of kilocalorie in terms of energy that they have, only 10% of it will be transferred when the zooplanktons consume them. Remaining of them will be lost as heat, will be given to the decomposers. Only 10% will be further transferred up. Only 10% to be further transferred up. So always it is going to be upright. Always will indicate upright. Yes, even in the parasitic and detritus food chain, even in there, Abhishek. So everywhere it will always be upright. So this is an example of the terrestrial ecosystem where you have the pyramid of energy, pyramid of the biomass. Both of them are upright. But when we talk about the aquatic ecosystem, there the pyramid of biomass is inverted. Energy will always be upright. Okay. Sajan, that's the reason for the top predators are always less in number. Yes. And also when it comes to competition, that is also something which determines the number of species at each trophic levels. Now, after this, we come to the portion of the other module where we shall be talking about what do we mean by biomes, various adaptations that the species indicate, ecological succession. All those we are going to cover in this particular module. So in this particular module, what is relevant for your prelims will be here, where questions have been asked from earlier. That is about ecological succession. Then after that, the adaptations by organisms. Then features of biomes and ecosystem. Then corals and mangroves, their utility, coral bleaching in general. Then after that, you also get questions from biogeochemical cycles. These are the portions from where questions are frequented in the prelims examination. And when it comes to the mains exam, there you get questions about ecological succession. There you will also find questions coming from corals, mangroves, wetlands. For all these, importance and threats. Then after that, you do get questions also from biogeochemical cycles. Okay. So that is the relevant portion from this module, which appears in the examination, be it the prelims or the mains. Now, accordingly, we will approach this. So first thing that we will take a look into is ecological succession. Then we will try to understand what do we mean when someone says a biome, how is it different from an ecosystem, what is the difference between each of them. Then we will take a look at the different types of biomes, their primary features. Now, here, that is why I had asked this earlier itself. Majority of you here, you have already completed or have had some idea about the portion of geography. So understanding the features of various biomes, that will come very easy and very naturally to you. So there you don't have to get concerned quite significantly. It is something which will be pretty much easily available to you and easily understood and understandable by you as well. Then when we talk about the corals or the aquatic ecosystem, there we will talk about what are the factors which end up determining the productivity in an aquatic ecosystem. The presence of sunlight, the presence of dissolved oxygen, and one of the other areas from where, or some of the other areas that we are going to cover from where questions are asked, that is about eutrophication. Eutrophication. And harmful algal bloom. Okay. Now, while studying this, we shall also be studying the portion relevant for current affairs for your corals, the portion relevant for current affairs for your mangroves, the government scheme, what is that MISTI scheme, Mangrove Alliance for Climate, what is that? So all those we are going to cover here. What is eutrophication? Why does this happen? Where is it that we experience it? Why all the urban landscape and the water bodies in the urban area, they have eutrophication, enriched waters that you have. So all those characteristics we will understand. But first things first, we will initiate the discussion from the portion of ecological or ecological succession here. Now, what do we understand by ecological succession? What is ecological succession? So before exposing you to this humongous text, let us talk about it for a bit. Now, in any particular landscape, in any particular region, it is not as if in the initial stages itself when the land gets created, it is not as if that at that particular stage you will have the mango and the banyan trees growing in that area. I'm sure you would be aware of the fact that when a new land gets created, it is not going to experience immediate growing of the flowering plants, regardless of wherever that land is created. Initially, you will find small organisms of plants, mosses, lichens, they start growing. Then after that, you'll find some seasonal plants to be growing here and there. And that too, they will not grow common or in a uniform manner. There will be sporadic growth here and there. Then after that, that seasonality will get converted into slight of permanency, where you will find certain permanent plants, flowering plants, which are able to survive throughout the year. Then after that, you will find eventually small trees, they will start growing. So what does this tell you? This tells you that the ecological community in any particular area, that slowly and steadily evolves itself. The types of species which inhabit an area, that also is a slow and steady work of evolution. That process where one particular community of organisms that replaces the earlier one and a more developed community of organisms comes into picture, that is succession, ecological succession. So overall, when you talk about ecological succession, it is the steady and gradual change in a species of a given area with respect to the changing environment. Okay, it all starts from a very simple life form, and those simple life forms slowly and steadily create a condition where more complex life forms, more complex species can come into existence. Okay, so always initiated by very simple forms of life, right? And these simple forms of life, which for the first time colonize a particular region, though they are referred to as pioneer species, known as pioneer species. Okay, they are the ones which are known as the pioneer species. Then after some time, you will observe that more complex forms of life, they start coming into existence. They start taking the space. They start inhabiting a particular region, isn't it? So here, these simple forms of life create an environment where more complex species start to inhabit. Eventually, what do you attain in that area? Is those kinds of species which have reached an equilibrium, the climax species, the most evolved kind of species that you can have, that is the climax species, they start living in that area. So ultimate aim of this process is to reach equilibrium in an ecosystem. The community that achieves that aim of attaining that equilibrium, that is referred to as the climax community or the climax species, right? So in the effort, in the endeavor to reach that state of equilibrium, that is where stability is attained. That is where some of the species, they will increase in number, some of the species will be eliminated in the process. So that is the process which always follows in the case of ecological succession. Now, in the case of ecological succession, you have two types, primary types or two basic types of succession. One is what is referred to as a primary succession. Another is what is referred to as a secondary succession. So you have classification in two basic forms. You have the primary succession, and then you have the secondary succession. What is the difference? We'll take a look into it. But just to introduce you to it, whenever you hear about the term primary succession, means in that region life did not exist from before. That region has been inhabited for the first time. That is what is indicated by the primary succession, right? Something which has been inhabited for the first time. Secondary succession, where let's suppose there had been life in that region, but due to forest fire or due to a volcanic event, all of them disappeared. And then again, how life germinates from that area, that is secondary succession. Now, each phases of this succession, that is what is referred to as a seer. Okay, in an area, the sequence of communities that changes or that undergoes a change, that is referred to as a seer. So thus, each community that changes is referred to as the serial stage or the serial community. Yes, Benita, that classification between primary and secondary, that can be taken as the analogy of greenfield and brownfield. Yes. Now, this ecological succession can be autogenic, where on its own it is carried out, or can be allogenic, where other outside factors are responsible. Let's suppose you have introduced a set of plants in that region. Let's suppose this succession is happening in the urban landscape, where it has got multiple different influences. So that is where it can be categorized as autogenic succession, or it can be categorized as allogenic. Now here, this is the process of succession. Overall, it includes various different stages. You have the stage of nudation, where everything is barren, just rocks, nothing else, right? Then you have invasion, where certain species, mosses, lichens, microscopic organisms, they come into the picture. They start softening the rock structure. Over a period of hundreds and thousands and millions of years, they end up creating or converting that rock into a soil, like straight. Then after that, you have competition and coaction, where you have multiple subspecies which are introduced in that region automatically with the help of the birds, with the help of other organisms. Now, initially, when the number of species are very, very less, all the species, they contribute to each other's benefit. For example, all of them will be working to weaken the rocks and to develop the soil profile. So that is where initially there will be coaction. All of them will be working towards the same goal. Then eventually, few of the species will be pushed out. That will be a reaction, and eventually stabilization or climate's community is attained. So this is the example of your primary succession, what is also referred to as pre-sear, right? The first form of succession or pre-sear. So in this case, observe, initially you have barren rocks, right? Slowly and steadily, some lichens, they have started appearing on the rocky surfaces. Then small annual plants and lichens, they dominate. And observe how even these rocks, they are slowly and steadily turning into what? Turning into soil. The soil is deepening. Now these are your pioneer species. Then after that, slowly the grasses and perennials as in the ones which can stay there throughout the year, right? Perennial is any event which can exist throughout the year. So perennials will come in. Then more shrubs, plants, grasses will come in. Eventually, the climate's community, the equilibrium one, will establish. So it is the succession that starts in a lifeless area, such as regions devoid of soil or the areas where the soil is unable to sustain life. Example, let's suppose a new landform has been created. How is it that a new landform can be created? Let us see. How is it that an entirely new landform can be created in the present scenario? No, not by decomposition of rocks. Decomposition of rocks means a landform is already in existence. Perfect, Benita. By volcanic eruptions. Let's suppose there has been a volcanic eruption underwater, and that volcanic eruption has kept on rising up, and eventually there is a creation of a volcanic island, which consists of only the bare and the barren rocks. So that is the condition where you have a landform, but no life at all. Slowly and steadily, you will have small amount of microbes which will start inhabiting that area, and slowly and steadily it will evolve to form the complex life forms that we have. So when the planet was first formed, there was no soil on Earth. It was made up of only rocks. The rocks were eventually broken down by microorganisms and other forms of weathering and eroded to form the soil. The soil then becomes the foundation of plant life, and these help in the survival of different animals and progresses from primary succession to a climate's community. So this is what is referred to as pre-sear or primary succession. Okay. Now, after this, we come to the secondary succession, or what is also referred to as sub-sear. So in the case of a secondary succession, you have a scenario where a life form already exists in that region. It is not completely devoid of life. A form of life already exists in that region, right? Then, over a period of time, that might get destroyed because of any event. Any event, let's say a kind of a cataclysmic event like a meteor strike, a cataclysmic event such as a volcanic eruption, a kind of an event like a forest fire, like an industrial disaster. Any of them can happen. It can destroy all the life forms. But then, how the various life forms come to inhabit that area back again, that indicates the secondary succession. Secondary succession is very, very quick, very fast as compared to primary succession. So this is much quicker or much faster process as compared to primary succession. Where in the case of primary succession, it can span for easily hundreds and thousands of years. Whereas in the case of the secondary succession, it can be carried out within a few decades itself. For example, one of the ideal examples that you find on planet Earth is the region of Chernobyl. Chernobyl is situated where? Let us see. No, shifting cultivation is not included in that. No. Chernobyl is situated in? Very good. Great. I hope all of us are aware about the radioactive or the nuclear disaster which happened in Chernobyl. Now, the Chernobyl nuclear disaster which happened immediately meant a kind of a significant deforestation, a kind of a devegetation where many of the plants, they simply ceased to exist in that area. And obviously the plants would cease to exist, and that radioactivity impacted so many different organisms and animals as well. Many of them ceased to exist. Now, what the botanists and the ecologists, they had predicted was that it will take maybe hundreds of years for all that radioactive material to get eventually dissipated. And after hundreds of years, maybe we can have some life. But people were surprised when they visited Chernobyl around 20 years later. They were surprised to note the amount of biodiversity which has come back in that region. So that is again a kind of a what? Secondary succession. Take the case of the urban forest that you have in the region of Nagasaki. Nagasaki is famous for an atomic bomb, right? The atomic bomb was detonated in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We are going to have the anniversary of that very soon. In the next 10 days, the entire world will be talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki again, that how it has been so many years and the world has not learned a lesson, etc., etc. But those were the areas which were again completely devastated. But again, look back at how, at a significant pace, biodiversity has come up in that area. Another example can be taken of that of a forest fire. Immediately after a forest fire, if you visit a particular region, it is as bad as a graveyard. Because I don't know if you have experienced it. Ideally, you should never experience this. Because in the case of a forest, when you visit a forest, you are enchanted by its greenery, by its diversity, by the various different kinds of organisms present. After a forest fire, all that you will find is ash and also the remains of various organisms who have not been able to escape that fire. Now, when a forest fire occurs, even the slightest blades of grasses, even they are burnt off. But then there's a kind of a resurgence. Very quickly, within a year, you will find the entire region repopulated. Why? Because you will have the ideal ingredients, the soil structure, the soil depth, presence of moisture, the ideal ingredients to support life, they have always been present there. Regardless of the fact whether the ecosystem has been destroyed, but those ideal ingredients will always be found to be present in that region. So that is why not only resurgence of life back, but also the population of life with various different biodiversity factors, that will also happen at a quicker pace. That is why, especially in the case of forest, it is said that forest fire is something which is significantly beneficial in the long run. It ends up weeding out the weaker plants and also ensures that the fertility of the soil is maintained. Okay. Will the environment or vegetation around Chernobyl be devoid of bioaccumulation of rain? No, bioaccumulation would be there. Bioaccumulation of certain waste is to be expected to be present in the region around Chernobyl. Now, then here, looking at the various different stages, this is the various different stages in a serial activity or in a succession. So the different stages that you have, it is the definition of all of it. So initially, you have the stage of nudation, when there is nothing out there, when it is absolutely a bare and a barren area, either by destruction or a newly created area, like a volcanic activity, earthquake, etc. At this point of time, not significant amount of life is prevalent. Then slowly, the first successful reproductive species, they will be introduced and you have the invasion. So you will have the pioneer species. The pioneer species which come in. Then you have cooperation and competition. So initially, when you don't have so many species, when the conditions are also hostile, each of the species directly or indirectly, they end up helping out each other. And when there are numbers that starts to thrive, that is when competition is something which will be observable. But initially, it will be cooperation. And then eventually you have stabilization, where equilibrium is attained by the establishment of climate's community. Okay, so attains equilibrium. Okay, that is what you have as the different stages. So this is a kind of a trivia, again relevant only for your prelims, which indicates to you that the ecological succession being carried out in different kind of landscape, they have been given a different name. Sear is something which is common. So hydrosear means succession which has happened in water. Xerosear, which refers to succession which has happened in a dry habitat. Lithosear, succession which has happened in the case of a rocky surface. Samosear, and so on. So that is basically your types of sears. Okay. Now, then we come over and we introduce ourselves to the concept of biomes. What do we understand by biomes? So before looking into the aspect of how is it that this term came into existence, what is the meaning of the term, what is the evolution of this term, let me give you a kind of a broader idea that how is it that you arrange the various organisms. So at an individual level, you have the individual organism. You have the organism. Then after that, a group of organisms will form what? Group of organisms. Very good. Will form a community. Now, various different communities, when they are present, they will represent what? Very nice. They will represent the population. Now, multiple such populations will represent. Rather than habitat, let us directly take ecosystems. Initially, you have habitat, then you have ecosystem, but let us jump the queue. Then, multiple such ecosystems. Very good. They form what is referred to as a biome. Multiple such biomes will represent what? Biosphere. Okay, so that is the hierarchical arrangement that you have in terms of biomes. So by this itself, we can gain an idea that a biome ends up representing multiple different types of ecosystems in one go. Now, when is it that the term biome came into existence? Why is it that it came into existence? Where was it used? So first of all, it found its usage as early as 1916, when you had an American environmentalist and an American ecologist, that is Frederick Clement. Frederick Clement used it for the first time in 1916. He used the term for the first time. At that point of time, not significant amount of that hierarchical development, etc. That work had not been developed. So what did Clement say? Clement basically said that you have large areas of the planet which can be classified based upon the kind of vegetation, the kind of climate that they have. And he said that depending upon the type of climate, obviously the vegetation will vary from one region to another. If you have a region where you have excessive amount of rainfall happening continuously throughout the year, then obviously you will experience rainforest in that area. You will not experience a kind of a grassland or a desert in that area. So he said that vegetation in an area ends up determining the types of species that live in an area. Understand this. Vegetation of an area is determined by is going to determine the types of species living in an area. And what is the vegetation in turn going to be dependent upon? Basically, the climatic factors in general. If all the other conditions are common, it is the climatic factors which will determine them. So Frederick Clement, and immediately after that, for a long period of time, biomes used to represent the biological communities and ecosystems based upon the categories of climate and the dominant vegetation. And you need to understand that chain. So basically, climate determines vegetation, right? And that vegetation determines the species and communities. So, based on the climatic condition and the vegetation type, initially the world was divided into various different biomes. And all these biomes together, they make up what? They make up the biosphere, the sphere of the living flora and faunal species that we have. That is biosphere. It is constituted by multiple different biomes. So what is the difference between a biome and an ecosystem? So a biome is a very large naturally occurring community of flora and fauna, whereas ecosystem is at a much smaller level. So here you will have many ecosystems that share the same climatic condition. And here climatic condition for an ecosystem is generally a very minor factor. It consists of a large geographical area and that consists of a small geographical area. It differs, one biome differs from each other as compared to the climatic conditions experienced. Whereas in this, multiple ecosystems can experience the same climatic conditions, right? Tropical rainforest, grasslands, deserts, etc. are examples. Here you can take the case of ponds, you can take the case of even, let's say, terrestrial ecosystem, you can take the case of aquatic ecosystem. These can be the categorization. Now, this was the early depiction by Frederick Clement. Now, later on, Heinrich Walter, he further went ahead and he classified the entire climatic zones or the entire biosphere based upon the climatic zones. So here, Heinrich Walter, basically a German ecologist, he divided the biomes into various climatic zones. PPT is having PYQs, Kishan. So one PYQ we have discussed already, a couple of them. The major PYQs we will be discussing next weekend, right? Majority of the PYQs we will take it up for discussion next weekend, because this Sunday we have not covered a substantial portion. So I hope you will understand and you will have a better realization of cross connectivity of topics when we discuss all the PYQs next weekend. Okay. Now, then when we talk about the classification of bio, so overall, as you can see, this is just like the climatic classification that you are exposed to when you are studying the portion of geography. That is, you have tropical rainforest, then savanna. Savanna is tropical wet and dry forest, subtropical desert, shrubland, temperate rainforest, temperate seasonal forest, temperate grassland. Then you have coniferous or taiga or boreal forest, and then you have the tundra. Let us very quickly go through the important features of each one of them, starting with the tropical rainforest biome. Now, this rainforest biome will be found around the region of equator, isn't it? Will be found around the rough area of equator. Obviously, this is not, or this is far from ideal equator if you have to think about it. So this can be salvaged a bit like this. Okay. Now here, what is it that you experience in terms of the characteristics of plants, animals, vegetation in general? Now, the temperature will be, or what will be the climatic condition? Climate, warm, humid, right? Adequate amount of rainfall. Now, what will be the characteristic of the trees here? The density of the trees will be very, very high, isn't it? The density of the trees will be very high because rainfall and moisture, they are easily available. Warm conditions, density of trees is very high. Now, after this, when we talk about the trees in themselves, these trees primarily will be evergreen in nature. What can we say about their height? Will they be very tall, or will they be average and small heighted? What do you think? Good. Very, very tall. Why? Because they need access to sunlight. Sunlight is a scarce resource in these areas. So in order to attain access to sunlight, the trees will be very tall. Very tall trees to access sunlight. Okay. Now, after this, now if the trees are very, very tall for gaining access to sunlight, what about the amount of sunshine on the forest floor? Will the amount of sunshine be higher, lesser, or negligible? What do you think? Perfect. Because the trees are very high, all these trees have a significantly wide canopy density. Canopy cover is very broad. That is where they will be blocking all the sunlight, and the forest floor will be devoid of sunlight. So you will have negligible amount of sunlight reaching the forest floor, right? Very tall trees with, and here you will have broad canopy, wide canopy. Now, forest floor is devoid of sunlight. Now, if the forest floor is devoid of sunlight, what about the growth of small plants and grasses? Will they be observed, or there will be negligible presence of these plants? What do you think? Very good, almost absent. So that is why the forest floor is devoid of vegetation. Now, if you don't have small plants, shrubs, or grasses on the forest floor, what can we say about the general presence of herbivores, the grazing herbivores that we have? Their population will also be very less. Perfect, they will be almost absent. Grazing herbivores are almost absent. So here, because the trees are very, very dense, they have a lot of canopy, a lot of rainfall on a daily basis. So on the forest floor, what will be the proportion of these dead leaves, twigs, and the dead organic matter? Will that be high in proportion or negligible in proportion? What do you think? Very good. That will be very high in proportion, because many of these trees will keep on having shedding their leaves continuously. So that is why here you will find a lot of these insects. Insect population is going to be very high, right? They will primarily feed upon these organic matter which keep on falling from that high trees. And once you have these insects, small ants, etc., then you will have the toads, frogs, and that will bring about snakes as well. Okay. Now, other than that, what other kind of species you will find? Will you be able to find the presence of monkeys, apes, chimpanzees, etc.? Arboreal organisms? Perfect. So these are the areas dominated by such arboreal organisms. What about the bird population? Bird population, will it be high or will it be low? The diversity? Very good, very high. So that is all that you need to extract from a particular biome. So here you will find that insect diversity is very high. Reptiles, then you have arboreal species. Arboreal, which basically jump from branches to branches, which exist in the, not on the forest floor, which don't come on the forest floor. For example, capuchin monkeys and so on, all of them, right? Bird diversity is also very high. Here you will not find very large organisms. You will not find significant amount of elephants. You will not find significant amount of rhinos, etc. There is one exception, where there is a tropical rainforest, but you still find larger organisms. Otherwise, larger organisms, they don't exist because larger herbivores, they don't get adequate food to eat, and also there is not enough spacing for their movement. So that is why you don't generally find them. But there does remain an exception, and that exception is prevalent where? In the region of Java and Sumatra. And there's a reason why only the tropical rainforest in that area consists of a rhino population, elephant population, and even a very rare tiger population. Sumatran tiger. The world believed that it went extinct till it was sighted. And there's a reason for that. It is believed that when these organisms went ahead to inhabit this region of Java and Sumatra, at that point of time, it was very much connected with the land area of rest of Asia. But slowly and steadily, as the water level went up during the last ice age and after that, that is when many of the organisms were trapped in those islands. And they remained there, they survived and thrived there. That is why the Sumatran rhino that you will come across, it has got a smaller size as compared to the rest of the rhino. The Sumatran elephant that you will come across, it has also got a smaller size as compared to the rest of the elephants. Because over a period of time, they have adapted themselves to live in those confined spaces. Okay. Now, what about the presence of organic matter in the soil? When we talk about organic matter in the soil, will it be high or low? Very good. It will be negligible. Why? Because of very high rate of decomposition. Very high rate of decomposition. Okay. So these are your characteristic features. So you have the Amazon forest in the region of South America, you have the Congolese forest, and then in Africa, then you have the forest in the region of Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, parts of Western Ghats. All of them represent this particular feature. Okay. Density of trees are very high, so large animals can't move easily. That is also correct. Okay. So now we take a break, the last major break that we will take for the day, and it is already 5:06. So we do one thing, we take a break till 5:45, and after that, when you come after 5:45, that is when we will continue with the rest, and we will carry on with the rest of the discussion. Okay. So let's take a break and let's be back. Sumatra region, Sridevi was earlier connected through the Isthmus of Kra with the rest of Asia. Okay. I hope that is understood. Right? Now, very good. Good one. Abhishek, that is correct. That is nice. So let's take a break and we'll meet at 5:45, guys.